Hello, and thank you for joining us today for what we're sure will be a very interesting and lively and participatory session. I'm Tricia Hackett. I'm the Senior Sustainable Urban Development Expert with the IURC North America region. This is our first session and masterclass on urban development in a series of 3 on cities supporting cities towards a circular economy. We're featuring representatives from the city of Fort Collins and from a Netherlands-based consultancy and experts in circular economy, Metabolic. In this session, we will hear from Fort Collins as they offer their city as a case study as they embark on their journey to update their economic health strategic plan with a first-time focus on circularity. Fort Collins was paired with the city of Villanova de Famalicão in the first phase of the IURC program and has been an active participant and learning partner with us ever since. In this session today, we have Molly Saylor, who's a lead specialist in environmental sustainability for the city. And I also want to mention Holly Pommel, who's a senior specialist in environmental sustainability, as well as Fort Collins, who has been both have been key in developing this first session in this series. Also, we are joined today by Erin Kennedy, who's a lead circular raw material system. It's the first time I've ever heard that as a title, with Metabolic on circular economy. And she will be sharing the circular economy framework, how it just differs from other frameworks, and how to determine which framework is useful for enabling action. So that's kind of setting the context. And now a bit of housekeeping. We would like to know where you are connecting from. So please, if you could write your name, title, and city in the chat box, that would be great. I'm connecting from Medellin, Colombia this morning. And for the presenters, almost don't need to say this anymore, but please just make sure your microphone is on mute when you're not speaking, and yeah, feel free to leave your camera on. And for the audience, if you have questions, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. The panelists will be answering your questions live as we go along, and also we'll have time later on in the session for them to answer your questions. So either written or on screen, kind of depending on the nature of the questions. If it's a question that's more relevant, I think, to a wider audience, then we're happy to have that response on screen. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded. We'll share the link afterwards with all the attendees, as well as the presentation, so you can share it with your colleagues who might not have been able to join us today, but you think would be interested. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Manuel Carmona Yerba, who's a counselor for the environment and oceans at the EU delegation in the US, who will offer the welcome on the side of the EU, and also tell us about why the circular economy is important for EU policy. So I'll take a breath and hand it over to you, Manuel.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I would like to thank in particular IURC colleagues for inviting me. Yes, I'm working here in Washington, D.C. to increase the cooperation between the EU and the US on circular economy and many other aspects of the green economy. I mean, I'm dealing also with biodiversity, oceans, fisheries, pollution, you name it. There's a lot on my plate. But in particular, I am a convinced individual that local action is crucial for green action, for the European Green Deal, for example. I have been working in the past with the Global Covenant of Mayors. I'm sure you are also aware of this initiative by the EU and Bloomberg Philanthropies here in the US that tries to work on climate, on emissions, on adaptation to climate change. Well, equally, the IURC has more extended scope, and within this scope, I'm very happy to see that circular economy is one of the pillars. And I'm happy because circular economy, it is a very positive agenda, I find, that brings together, the fight against pollution, trying to solve the problem of biodiversity loss, trying to reduce emissions, You probably know this figure that a global circular economy would be able to reduce emissions by 50% of global emissions. So it is indeed a very positive agenda that also creates jobs. In the EU, for example, we calculate that there are around 4 million jobs coming from the circular economy, and that was figures that are pretty old, like 4 years ago, and this is growing afterwards. You will see these figures in the Circular Economy Action Plan. And this is basically the main framework in the EU policy for circular economy. The Circular Economy Action Plan, adopted in 2020, is part of the European Green Deal, the bigger umbrella for the green action in the EU. And the Circular Economy Action Plan is being implemented as we speak. I mean, we had an earlier package this year of regulations and communications, and we have yesterday the adoption of a new legislative proposal on packaging waste, setting targets for recycled content, for plastic, etc., and a communication trying to clarify the policy scenarios for biodegradable, compostable, and bio-based plastics. This is a growing market, at the moment very small, but that will innovate, and we will find a way in the future to replace fossil fuel-based plastics. So there's also this policy instrument adopted yesterday. I invite you to consult that. Possibly will be made available to you. This is really coming from very recently, yesterday. More is to come on greenwashing, for example, on making sure that consumers and also industry knows that the products that they're using and consuming or are acquiring are not, follow methodologies that are well attested to provide information on the recycled content, for example, that there's no hazardous materials, etc., etc. Internationally, the EU is also pushing for the circular economy. You probably have heard about the Global Alliance of Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. We are pushing for this high ambition coalition on circular economy at the UN in New York in particular, but we are also this week negotiating the Global Plastics Agreement along with the US. We are in very close contact with Monica Medina, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oceans and International Scientific and Environmental Affairs, so that the EU and the US, as much as possible, can have a similar line in these key negotiations happening in Uruguay, in Punta del Este. So a lot going on. I'm not going to keep you from starting on this. Just to mention very quickly that being now in DC, I am privileged to see how in the US also circular economy is progressing a lot. I see the progress here much more at state level, to be honest with you, but probably we can have a conversation perhaps on this state level, city level, like Fort Collins and others that are, taking the lead rather than the federal level, particularly in Congress. Even though in Congress you have now some bipartisan action on data and circular economy and on rural areas and circular economy. There is some bipartisan initiatives, but they are not yet adopted as far as I know. To me, hearing that Fort Collins is one of the front runners was not a surprise, and I tell you why. Because we invited some state legislators in July to come to Europe to learn about circular economy in Europe, and one of them was Lisa Cotter, a representative from Colorado, and one of the persons working really hard on the extended producer responsibility, and she was really a convinced person that this is the way to create jobs in the local economy, for social goals, for environmental goals. She's now being elected senator of the state legislature in Colorado. So you have there really a real guru of circular economy in your state legislature, and I'm happy to point that out. I was exchanging emails with her yesterday. That's it. I'll leave it at that. I think the EU and there's a lot of promise in the EU and the US to come together and to align circular economy policies, and for that, cities have an outstanding role, a very important role, because this is when push comes to shove in many green policies. Thank you very much, and I'll be with you for a while, as much as I can. I wish you a good webinar.
Thank you so much, Manuel. It's I know it's not always easy for us to, you're all very, very busy in the EU delegations, but it's so important when we are able to have your particular perspective, because we know this program, started a few years ago. Very much this network comes out of the fact of our focus on the Green Deal, but things have moved on, and like we always say that this is a program, say when push comes to shove, and also I'd say where the rubber meets the road, where we're really on the ground, but that we having these kinds of discussions with the EU delegations also helps us to see where the policy are going and to constantly keep that connection between the practice and policy, because ultimately what happens on the ground, what cities are doing is where the action, where the results come from, but that also needs to always be influencing policy. So you're helping us to keep that virtuous circle alive, and I'm sure this will be the beginning of many conversations that we'll have. And I was just thinking it would even be great to have like a whole session just hearing more about those new policies are unfolding and that relationship between the US and EU and circular economy. But we'll talk about that later. So thank you, Manuel. That was fantastic and very timely. And we can share the links for the new policies that you mentioned in the follow-up emails along with the presentations and recording. So Molly, over to you now.
Yeah, hi everyone, and can I just get a quick audio check? Everyone can hear me okay? We had some tech issues this morning, so I'm going to actually be presenting from my phone. So if at any point the quality starts to lag, please just stop me and let me know. But just want to say good morning, good afternoon, maybe a blanket good day, since I know people are joining from all across the world. As Trisha already mentioned, my name is Molly Saylor, and I'm a lead sustainability specialist with the city of Fort Collins. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I joined from the lands, the ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne. At the city of Fort Collins, I do a lot of our waste planning and policy work, and I also get to support some of our climate planning work. And this today is actually a great intersection of those two things. So I'm going to kick us off and really just introduce Fort Collins as a case study. We're, as Trisha mentioned, offering our city up, not as a leader necessarily, but as a city that's just trying to figure this out. I think just as many other cities are as well. So we have some questions that we've really helped design this series around, and we think those questions are actually questions that almost all cities have as they get started working on the circular economy. So I think we'll go ahead and dive in, and hopefully between today and the next two sessions, we'll be able to get some answers together on how we can really develop effective circular economy strategies. So Erin, I think if you can go ahead and I actually, since I have a limited view here, can we do a check that folks can see the slides?
Yes, we can see.
Great. And then if we can go to the slide, the second slide, Erin. So just want to talk a little bit more about Fort Collins and the history of our work. Oh, Erin, can you go back one? Yeah, perfect. So we've been working on climate, renewable energy, and recycling for over 2 decades. And more recently, we've just updated our energy, our climate, and our waste plans into one mega plan that we've called our climate future. So you can see here the 3 old plans that are now combined into one. And then you can see our goals for each of those areas right below. So you can see that we have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. We actually have an interim goal to be 80% below our 2005 baseline by 2030, so just 7 years from now. We also have the goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030 and zero waste by 2030. So we have a lot of work ahead of us in just the next 7 years. Our new plan has over 70 strategies to achieve these goals in a way that really reflects our community's vision for a sustainable carbon neutral future. One of the strategies that came out of this Our Climate Future mega plan connects to our topic today. So we're currently updating our city's economic health strategic plan. And that is all about how we support businesses. And this update is going to be the first time that we add a circular economy focus. So we're really excited. And that is why we're asking so many questions right now. So while we're really excited to be embedding that, and Erin, I think you can hit next slide here. We are a little unsure what framework to anchor to. In the past, When we've done other work around waste or climate, we've been really successful tying our waste or climate work to specific frameworks that can help us make decisions and also communicate those decisions. We are fairly familiar with that really simple framework on the top left, and that's what most people, including us, tend to think of first when we talk about the circular economy. It's that taking a linear system and turning it into a loop. But as we dig into this more deeply and we start to do research, we're seeing there's a lot of frameworks from different organizations, and they have varying level of detail and nuance. And so in a crowded field, how do we pick the framework that will best help us along our path? Which one will help us move out of the conceptual phase and really into meaningful action? So for now, at the highest, most super simple level, we're really thinking about that circle framework at the top left that turns that formerly linear process into a circle. And we're just using that concept to think through two things to get us started. First, what is being manufactured in our community? And number two, what is being landfilled in our community? Because if we're going to create a loop, those two things need to have more connection to each other. Next slide, Erin. So this slide is really about the production side, and it just deserves a little bit of context. So if you don't know about Fort Collins actually isn't a big manufacturing city. Historically, it's been more agricultural. Our one big industry historically was refining sugar. Now, in modern times, our city is mostly a university town. So we produce a lot of knowledge, but of course we do have a few big industries. We make great beer. We like to say that we're the Napa Valley of beer. We also make high-tech products and some machinery. So when we think about what's needed to make those products, the thing in this table come to mind. And so you can see tech and beer, those feel pretty clear. Machinery, we're actually still working to understand what kind of machinery is being built in our community, what components go into that. So it's a really authentic place in our learning as we dig into this planning process to learn a little bit more about our industries and what is actually needed as inputs to those production processes. Next slide. So this slide shows the other side of the equation. What are communities landfilling? So the pie chart on the left shows the results of a waste characterization study that we did a few years ago. So if you look carefully, and I know it's a little bit small, maybe we can share these slides out. You can see all the types of materials going to our landfill. You can see the biggest wedge in dark blue is organic waste. We don't unfortunately yet have composting in our community, but then you can see we've got, some of the more traditional recyclables, all the way up to things like consumer goods at the top, which is a fairly large chunk. And as you can see, if you look on the right at the green pie chart, this is the same data just organized by how we might approach it. So you can see we have quite a bit of opportunity still in traditional recycling and composting work. You can also see a big wedge is industrial recycling. And I'll share in a moment some examples. We're actually pretty proud of some of the things that we already do in industrial recycling in Fort Collins. And then there's a really big chunk that we think is going to have to require a lot of circularity thinking and strategies. So as I mentioned, that's a lot of consumer goods. What do we do with all those consumer goods that are not made to be recycled? So Erin, next slide. As I mentioned just on the previous slide, Fort Collins is actually pretty good at diverting industrial materials from our own operations, and there's a lot of them. So there's still a lot of remaining potential. But you can see here we have some leading by example efforts. Those are the things we do with our own municipally generated waste. So for example, we have our own crushing facility that crushes asphalt and concrete and recycles it for our own municipal use, but also for use in our community. And we're one of only a few cities in the US to have that. We also have some really cool waste prevention laws, some regulations. So for example, we get a lot of really bad hailstorms, some of the worst in the country, which means that people have to replace the roofs on their houses pretty frequently. So now we require a really special class of shingles that's more resistant to hail, which means that we see a lot less waste. And we've actually seen that come through and prove out as a waste reduction strategy for us. And then that blue box just highlights where we think we have the most potential to still learn, especially through this economic health strategic planning process. How can we support businesses? So like several US cities, we run a pitch competition for sustainability initiatives and startups and provide them some seed funding. Many have had circular economy focus, and that's cool. But is it enough? Does that get us to the biggest manufacturing levers? So with those examples, I'll just share briefly a couple of questions that we're really asking ourselves. I'll talk about the first sort of in the most detail, because that's what we're really talking about today. And that's just, oh, Erin, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So this first question is just around the fact that when we look into plans, circular economy, waste plans, climate plans, we see a lot of recycling strategies sort of rebranded as circular economy. And we get that. Recycling is by definition circular. Like, of course, recycling belongs in the circular economy conversation. And also, we're interested in what framework can help ensure that we're really going beyond that and impacting new sectors and new materials for which we don't already have good recycling strategies. So that is what we're really focused on today. But then we also want to understand these other two areas of questions. What do businesses need from cities? Not what they need in general, but really specifically from cities. What support can we provide them to be more circular? And then also, what are other cities doing? We have been looking in plans and we've seen some things, but we haven't seen the kind of things that we think are really getting at the biggest levers. But surely people are out there working on it. So we want to dig into that more and understand who's doing what and who's doing it well and what can we learn. So you can see these questions handily align with the 3 sessions in this series, almost like we had planned it that way. So I'm going to stop here and hand it over to Erin to talk about that framework question. And then I'll come back a little bit later to introduce an activity that we have planned for today and to answer questions. So Erin, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Kennedy. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm actually based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, though I am actually originally from the US. I'm from sunny Florida. I have a really long history of being involved in circular economy related initiatives and activism, starting with the food rescue program that I founded all the way back in 2001, leading up to the Repair Cafe that I currently run in Amsterdam. For the past 8 years, I've been working at a company called Metabolic that's based in Amsterdam. So Metabolic is actually a mission-driven organization with a very ambitious goal of transitioning the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable state. And we're actually working towards this goal in a number of different ways. We have a number of organizations within Metabolic, our consultancy, which was mentioned, but also a ventures division that's supporting entrepreneurs and a number of other activities as well. So actually a big part of our work is focused on the circular economy, and we've worked with dozens of cities around the world on the circular economy projects. Some of those projects are relatively minor, for example, looking at urban mining, what's possible to extract from the environment. And some of them have really been building and implementing really big comprehensive circular economy strategies. So for example, we worked with the city of Charlotte back in 2017 to build the first circular economy strategy for a city in the United States. And we've been working with the city since then to help them implement some of the key elements of that strategy as well. So today I'm going to talk about concepts and frameworks related to the circular economy for 3 purposes. First of all, what's relevant to know when you're defining the circular economy within your own context. Secondly, understanding which concepts and frameworks are out there to help you understand how to build a strategy of systems transformation. And finally, concepts that are really helpful to enable actions. So hopefully some of the content of today will be interesting and new for you as well. So first of all, when we're defining the circular economy, I think we're all on the same page in terms of what that is, but it's nice to recap anyways in case it's a newer topic for some. So the circular economy is compared with a linear economy, where we're taking resources from the environment, we're investing a lot of energy and a lot of labor into processing those into products. And then unfortunately, usually within a very short period of time, those investments are lost as we dispose of many products. So this linear economy has been blamed for a lot of the environmental and socioeconomic problems that we see in our current economic system. And as an alternative, what's called a circular economy has been proposed. And this basically means that we're trying to keep that investment that we've made in energy and labor and turning those materials into products, we're trying to keep that investment for as long as possible. For example, by repairing and maintaining and extending the lifespan of products and ensuring that all material resources are recovered. So this framework here is one of the most well-known frameworks for the circular economy. It's called the butterfly diagram by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And you see here different cycles of organic materials as well as technical cycles for metals and minerals. Now, what's really important is that this framework doesn't really get at that context of environmental and social impacts and elements that are really critical to what a circular economy is. This is really just a technical description of a circular economy. So we also need to consider those environmental and social considerations as well as we're defining a circular economy. So we make sure we're building the right type of thing. So one framework we like to use quite a lot is what's called the planetary boundaries framework. So this framework actually tries to build a science-based approach for defining how much impact we can exert on the environment before we start to put our own economic system at risk. So you see for 9 different planetary systems that this has been quantified. For many of them, we're still within a safe operating space. But for some of them, like biodiversity loss, for chemical pollution, and for nutrient flows, we've actually exceeded safe boundaries. So we need to make sure that the new circular system that we're building also keeps us within these key planetary boundaries. And then there's that social side as well. So it's possible that we could build a technically circular economy and recover all critical metals, for example, by putting in really cheap labor, child labor, for example, or forced labor. But that's obviously not the outcome that we want to see achieved with a circular economy. So it's important to define a circular economy as also not causing any social impacts and also supporting social goals that we have as a society. So for this reason, Metabolic has our own framework of the circular economy. This is called the 7 pillars of the circular economy. So basically, this is a holistic framework that says, yes, we need to ensure that all materials are continuously cycled at a high value, but we also need to make sure that energy is based on renewable sources, that we're extracting water at sustainable rates, that we're supporting biodiversity, that those social aspects like health and well-being in society and culture are supported, and that we're generating value also beyond only financial measures. So for example, that we're generating social value with this new economy. So our definition of a circular economy is actually a new economic model for addressing human needs and fairly distributing resources without undermining the functioning of the biosphere or crossing any planetary boundaries. So you can see in this that we've incorporated that environmental and that social element as well. And our framework is not the only holistic framework out there. So I put one other example that you might have already seen, or maybe this is new to you. This is what's called the donut model or donut economics by Kate Raworth. Basically, there are those 9 key planetary boundaries. On the outside, we need to keep our impacts on the environment within those. At the same time, there is some environmental impact that we'll need to have to make sure that we can meet the needs of society as well. So this is what's called the social foundation. So in this framework, it defines an economic system that is the safe and just space for humanity that maintains itself in between these 2 boundaries. So next, I'm going to talk about a couple of concepts and frameworks around systems transformation that are maybe useful as well. We've developed a lot of strategies for shifting towards a circular economy with cities and companies before, and there's a couple of frameworks that we come back to again and again that we find really helpful. First of all is understanding how to take a spatial approach or spatial model to thinking about developing that strategy. Because, for example, it's not going to be possible to close the loop and create a fully circular system locally for something like scarce metals. These are mined and manufactured in specific parts of the world. So you need that global cooperation to enable a circular system. However, at a local level, there's a lot you can do, for example, with food and nutrients. These are going to be produced and consumed everywhere in really large volumes. And this is something that you could act on a local level. So taking a sort of spatial approach, thinking about what scale these value changes on is a helpful starting point when building a strategy. Secondly, consumption is going to be a really big topic. And I know that cities are often focused on local production-based or sector-based impacts, for example, and how they set their climate strategies. But in order to really enable a circular economy, they're going to have to think beyond their own city boundaries. The reason for that is that cities are often net consumers. They're importing a lot of materials and products from outside the region. That means that a lot of the impact and a lot of the circular economy stuff is actually happening outside of the city boundaries. So cities need to think creatively about how they can address consumption and change those consumption patterns locally as well. I think there's this misconception that there's not a lot that cities can do to act on consumption, maybe only education, for example, that may or may not have that large of an effect. But actually, there are quite a lot of opportunities. Molly mentioned one earlier, actually, with the change in the shingles. Just a simple regulation change in terms of the building code reduced the consumption of shingles drastically. We worked on a project for the city of Amsterdam that's kind of similar. In that project, we actually defined circular land tendering requirements. So if a developer wanted to build an apartment complex, they would have to meet certain requirements around which materials are used, how the buildings are designed in terms of longevity, how they can reduce consumption of different resources over time as well. And one last framework that's useful to think about when you're talking about that strategic side of things, so how you'll shift from the linear system to this future state. One framework I'd like to point to is the 3 Horizons framework. This was built by one of our partners. And basically it allows for creating a bit of a dialogue around how the transition itself will take place. So you see Horizon 1 here. This is the business as usual this is sort of the horizon that keeps the lights on as the transition's taking place, and it's losing its fit for purpose, it's losing its grasp over time. However, there are elements of that you do want to conserve and take forward into the future state. Secondly, you see Horizon 2, which is all about innovation and entrepreneurship. There's a lot of new ideas that are always popping up, and eventually the interest tapers off. And that's because Horizon 3, which is really the viable future, where you've discovered which things are really working and which things are going to be viable to scale out, those things are coming into full effect. So lastly, I'm going to walk through a couple of key circular economy concepts that are interesting to think about when you're thinking about the types of actions that you can take as a city. The first concept is the concept of urban mining. I'm not sure how many people have heard of this concept before, but if you can imagine in a future state where you're no longer extracting a lot of resources from the environment, from conventional mines, then you can start looking at cities as a space where you can extract all of the resources you need for your economy to continue onwards. So this is an example here on the left side from my city, from Amsterdam. Every year we lose an astounding 15,000 bikes into our canals each year. And the city actually goes around and extracts all of these bikes from the canals. And this is actually a really reliable source of scrap metal for the city. So we understand that every year this amount of material will be removed. Now, of course, that's not necessarily the most sustainable solution of scrap metal, but it is sort of good to understand that that's available. On the right side, there's another example from the city of Rotterdam, where we did an urban mining project to understand where within the city there was going to be a supply or a demand of different construction materials over time, based on where different construction and demolition activities were going to be taking place. And this is really interesting to look at over space and time, because then you can start to make connections in terms of connecting those materials demanded and supplied. And so you can figure out some logistical things like where to put material hubs to store those materials for a short period of time before they're needed. A second concept is around industrial symbiosis. So typically when you're just looking at a recycling strategy, you take materials like plastics, for example, you recycle them and you put them out on a general market. But the idea of industrial symbiosis is really to skip all of that middleman stuff and try to find opportunities for companies to collaborate and share resources or waste resources directly. So an example here on the left that you see almost universally in places like Fort Collins probably as well. Anywhere you have beer brewing activities, there's a lot of spent grains from those activities, and this can be converted into bread for food production. So this is one example. On the right side is another example. So you don't just need to look at solid waste. You can also look at wastewater, for example, or waste energy, heat from different industrial activities, or even waste gases. So we actually worked with a steel company who wanted to see if their waste gases could be used in chemicals production, so you no longer need fossil fuels for that production. So this is a pilot installation that was set up at the steel facility to see if that opportunity was viable. Now, I think most people are probably familiar with the concept of R strategies. So these are different strategies to deal with the problem of solid waste, and they're sort of ranked. So the higher R strategies, or the more sustainable ones, are around preventing that waste from occurring in the first place. And the least sustainable or the least desirable options are around energy recovery or even recycling. So ideally, you want to find ways to use those products with as much of that invested energy and labor as possible by maintaining the contents of that product as it is. So using components again, for example, or extending the lifespan of those products. And these things are really hard to do. And the main reason for that is actually that it requires the cooperation of entire value chains to enable those types of activities. If you're a fashion designer, for example, and you want to design a product that will last a really long time and can be repaired or can be disassembled for recycling at the end of life, it doesn't matter how well you design it. If the systems aren't in place to collect and repair and recycle those in the way that you had envisioned. So you really need collaboration across the entire value chain. So we have a concept called innovation ecosystems, which is enabling those different stakeholders in the value chain to collaborate on bigger picture projects. This is something that we're doing for the textile sector in the city of Amsterdam. So I only have one last example of what are called living labs. So these are spaces that allow for a lot of demonstration and experimentation by many different stakeholders, from private companies, researchers, students, and the general community. But what they allow us to do is actually pilot and demonstrate different circular economy technologies or business models. So on the left side is an example we built in Amsterdam called the Kovel. This was a place where we took a lot of old recycled houseboats and we put them on a plot of land, and we created circular resource management systems around energy and water and human waste, for example. And those were demonstrated on a very small scale. And eventually, the rest of the neighborhood in Amsterdam picked up on it, and a lot of these things were scaled up to the neighborhood scale and beyond. So it had a lot of power beyond its own borders to enact change within that broader system. These other two examples on the right, Blue City in Rotterdam and the innovation barns that opened just last year in Charlotte, these are really more focused on entrepreneurship. So how you can bring together different circular economy businesses and give them a space to experiment. But there is sort of an educational component to this as well, as a lot of students can come and look at what's happening and be inspired to take forward and do their own activities. So this is my last slide. I think I'm going to let Molly take back over and introduce the exercise that we're going to do together. But just briefly, a quick reminder that if there are any questions, to pop them into the Q&A. So I'll work on answering those shortly.
Hello again, everyone. I am excited to get to share a really cool activity that we have put together for us today. It's just going to be a short activity to get you thinking. It can be as real or as fictitious as you want. We're going to share a link, and actually I think I just saw it come through in the chat, to a Miro board that we've prepared. On that Miro board, you'll see a workspace for your city, where we want you to write down what is manufactured and what is produced in your city, and then to think a little bit about how these could be recombined to be more circular systems and how they could create multiple benefits to the economy, environment, and community. We're actually going to continue to come back to this exercise for each of our sessions so that it's going to build over the series. And at the end, hopefully we'll have a lot of really cool ideas. Some of them might be really possible to implement in your city, and some might just be something you imagine that can spark an idea for another city. So let's go ahead and switch to the Miro board, and I'll give us a quick demo and a little bit of information. And so let's see. So it looks like we've got that pulled up. Just a couple of things for orientation purposes. We have on the far left, sort of the top description of the exercise. So if you ever get lost in this board, you can scroll all the way to the left and all the way to the top, and you'll be back where you started. Beyond that, we've got a short explanation of what the intention of the exercise is at the top. Then we have some resources as a reference, Metabolic's framework, because we're going to ask you to start looking at that through your workspace. And then at the bottom, there are really detailed step-by-step instructions of what we want you to do. But we can actually, for now, zoom in. Well, maybe I'll pause first, because the cities each have a workspace and they go alphabetical. From Fort Collins obviously is not the start of the alphabet, but after that, it goes just A to Z. So if you scroll down, you should be able to find your city. There were 2 cities, Thessaloniki and Villanova de Famalicão, that didn't have room. So if you have to scroll a little bit further to the right, at the top, you'll be able to see where that starts. So I think, yep. And there's also a few that we left just totally blank. So if, for example, you need an extra workspace, you're welcome to go and work there, or to copy it and create another space for yourself. We also, if people are having any hard time with this, or there's maybe multiple people who've joined from your city, just grab a piece of paper and a pen. There's no reason that folks can't do this in the old-fashioned way too. But first, let's just take a quick look at the Fort Collins example. So Erin, maybe you can zoom us in a little bit. So on Fort Collins's example, you can see that we've got some of our manufacturers, our industries, and our waste streams listed. So we're going to ask you to fill those in for your city. You'll see that there's places that say insert, and you can just double click on where it says insert and type over what the actual industry or waste stream is in your community. If you're not sure, you can also just use the ones we filled in for Fort Collins, or just make some up. So then once you have those filled in, we want you to play around with the arrows and start thinking about how you can connect the waste streams and the manufacturing industries. You can just click on an arrow if there's already one there, or if you lose the arrow or you want another one. When you click on an object, there are some blue dots, and you can take those blue dots and pull them over. And again, if you're having a hard time with any of this, just grab a piece of paper and a pen, or maybe jot down some ideas. Once you have some connections made, we want you to think about what is behind that connection. What could be a strategy? Then we want you to capture that. So we, for example, in Fort Collins, used the example, and we listed 2, and we gave you space to have 2 ideas as well. So the 2 ideas I had were, 1, connecting food waste to our beer brewing industry, and maybe being able to use some of the yeast from stale bread to actually do beer brewing. I'm not a brewer, maybe that wouldn't work, but I have curiosity about it. And then the other idea that I had further to the right is connecting our textile waste to our machinery, because if any of those machinery pieces were to have like upholstery, like the seats that you sit on, sometimes those can be stuffed with wasted textiles. So those were the 2 ideas I had. And then the final step is just to look at the icons at the bottom that are from Metabolic's framework and copy them up to show which additional benefits that you can get by implementing a strategy like that. There's no pressure. It's really for you. We'll have about 10 minutes now for you to work with this. If you don't get done, the link you'll still have, you can come back to this later. You can also add ideas next time. And we're also, all ears now or after the fact if you need a little bit of extra support. And we did put some tips for Miro also underneath the instructions. So I think we'll pause there and let people start to play with this. And we'll pull everyone back in about 10 minutes to have a 5-minute close. And if there are any questions in the meantime, we will be available to answer those either about the activity or just about the content we've presented. And you're welcome to just keep working and listen as you go. So I think we will, I'll rely on our organizers and other folks to help navigate any questions we have.
Great, thanks, Erin and Molly, for those great presentations. And also just wanted to say, if there's anybody who's not working on the Miro board and wanted to ask a question during this time, I think that would be okay as well, because we can multitask here. So feel free to turn on your camera and ask a question directly to Molly or Erin and while you're working. Rachel, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi there.
Hi,
Thank
Rachel.
you so much. Hi, thanks so much for these presentations. It's yeah, a lot of these questions we are asking ourselves as well here in the city of Ottawa. So I work in solid waste here, and we are developing a new solid waste master plan. A guiding principle is to follow circular economy principles. And one of our many different waste plan options, there's 57 of them, is to develop a circular economy strategy. What we're kind of playing with now is when to start implementing all the different options for the waste plan. So we're having conversations now on, do we develop a circular economy strategy upfront, or do we start to implement some of the other options that are going to support a circular economy and kind of get going on those first? So I guess my question really is, how important is it to develop a circular economy strategy when we are going to be developing a lot of options that will support that? But is it good to have a circular economy strategy developed upfront rather than trying to implement that further down the road when we've started to introduce more recycling options, for example?
I'm happy to provide my thoughts on this. We've worked to build strategies with cities like Charlotte, for example, that included comprehensive roadmaps. And what you see is that in the earlier years, there are a lot of those foundational elements. So it's not really possible to, set up a completely circular value chain in year one, but rather you need to have good data collection processes. You need to build a network of engaged companies. So there's a lot of earlier activities that need to take place. So I would recommend at least going through that sort of road mapping process to think about what are the key enablers. And of course, that's something we're going to get into in the second workshop as well, in terms of what types of support companies need to take things forward on their own. But in terms of building out a super comprehensive strategy that requires years of planning, it's not necessary to get going, but having a clear sense of what that roadmap looks like and what the key enablers are is a good place to start. But anyone else, feel free to weigh in on that.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is that there are almost always opportunities through building partnerships and relationships that are sort of that more curated approach. And sometimes before we have systems for these things, sometimes those early sort of relationship-based curated opportunities can be the ones that later demonstrate a success story that, that others can sort of realize it's a sort of proof of concept, but also then can help sort of work through some of the kinks before you roll it out to scale. And I think we see that actually in a lot of places, including in our equity work of, again, before we have systems, we have just one-off opportunities, and there's a lot to be learned through those. So that's something that I've even just been thinking of for our work. So I appreciate that question.
I wanted to say as well that we have some attendees that don't have panelist rights, if you will, to turn on your camera. And so Susanna is managing things in the background as was trying to upgrade, if you will, some of you to panelists. So let us know if those of you who are not on as panelists right now, meaning that you have access to video and audio, if you'd like to ask a question live on air. Okay. I can see that we have, maybe she's working hard, but and is focused on other things. But I see we have Kirsten Hale, who's from the city of Essen, who's paired with Fortaleza in Brazil, and this is precisely the topic that they're working on. And not to put Kirsten on the spot, but I'd be really interested to hear how this presentation and I guess the point of departure, if you will, that Fort Collins is in, kind of resonates with what's happening in Essen. We might come back to that later at a different point.
Oh, hi Trisha, hi everybody. It's Kirsten.
I put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting what you are doing there at at your city. We are just trying with my colleagues to fill this whiteboard, so I was just a little bit busy.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Everything's fine. Yeah, it's really great, and these strategies and these diagrams are interesting. I think we can use something like that at Essen too. So now I think we will try to put our city on that whiteboard. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you for showing up. Nice to see you.
It is pretty fun to sit here and watch all of the activity on the mural board. So I'm enjoying seeing cities enter things in, and I can see the gears turning for folks. I might actually take the opportunity just for a minute to ask Erin a question, if unless we have other folks that have raised their hand. Trisha,
I don't see anyone else right now. I was just thinking of putting Andrea on the spot, but you go ahead. We'll see.
Oh, I love the idea.
We'll give her a minute.
The idea of hearing from Andrea too, and maybe I can ask that question of Andrea and Erin, because I think they might both have some thoughts on this.
Great.
But I think we see some of the businesses in our community doing cool things that are working towards circularity. And I think we know we've done some things that help circularity, but I think that this sort of missing gap of really understanding, like, what is it we could do as the city that could help? And I know that's sort of the question we're asking throughout all of these, but I'm just, I'm thinking, even as I was making our strategy example on the Miro board, I realized I wrote like, well, just connect this loop and that loop. And I was like, well, when I say we, do I mean the city? Because we're not the businesses. So really, like, is it a partnership we need to develop, a cluster? So when we think about connecting, for example, the stale bread to brew beer, with VNF's experience and Erin, your experience, like, what would be a good first step on that?
I don't know if Andrea wants to speak to this too, but I guess I can go first. I'm sure some of you have already seen that there are these specialized tools that try to match different waste streams to companies or users that might want to make use of those. And when I was doing research on those types of tools, I found that actually just having events where different manufacturers and businesses within a region could talk to each other actually resulted in more tangible new business cases of industrial symbiosis being taken forward. So I do think that just building that network of sharing and connecting people is one of the most crucial leverage points. And when we've worked with cities and just shared, as we're going through an interview process, for example, speaking to a university, shared something that we heard from another university or another stakeholder, they've been really excited about it because they've never heard of that sort of business opportunity or intervention they could apply. And we think that just having the platform for companies and other types of organizations to share these types of learnings and best practices and stuff like that, alongside giving them an opportunity to mingle and share is really powerful. So I think that's the first thing that I would suggest. Of course, this does also get into that topic for the second webinar. There's a lot more in terms of like what policy levers are there, et cetera, but I think I'll stick just to the one point for now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think
Andrea.
I think Marisa is also here, but I don't know where because I can't see her name. Maybe Marisa, are you there? Well, maybe she can appear. Okay, she's there.
Yes,
I agree with Heron. It's very important to facilitate companies' meetings. They belong to the same sector, but they usually don't talk each other, or they talk not enough. And if we get them together, they discover what they are doing, and they can share things, and they can. It's something. It's very easy for them to work together with the symbiosis approach. And they can do a lot more that we can do as a city. It's very good if we can meet them together. Another, I think this is a very good approach. Marisa, can you share some ideas? Because Marisa is coordinating some circular economy projects from Famalicão. So she has a lot of experience in this issue. Marisa, can you share with us, please?
So, hello. Good morning or good afternoon. Here in Portugal is good afternoon to everyone. So, in our experience is, like Andrea is saying, sometimes we feel that the local stakeholders don't talk with each other. So it's very difficult. For instance, in the textile industry, we have the textile wastes, and we can make them connect. And for instance, we have the oldest company that make fibers, textile fibers from textile waste. Has, I think, 30 years, is a very old company, but we can at a local point of view make them work with the textile companies that have a lot of textile wastes. So these connections are very hard to make. Another thing that from our experience is difficult, it's to explain the concept of circular economy to the community. Sometimes it's very hard for us, and I think it's the name. Even yesterday, I was in a meeting with the 15 cities of Portugal. Was a meeting in Braga, and we are talking about that. Because, for instance, in Portugal, circular economy is something that my parents, my grandparents, they all did that in the old days. So to make them understand that this new concept in the daily base, it's very difficult. So the communication with the and the information to the community, has a huge role in transfer these ideas. And I do believe from my experience that circular economy is part of our daily choices. So everything that we choose every day, what we buy in the supermarket, if we buy shoes, if you buy a piece of trousers or whatever, a TV, we need to start to make different choices when we buy something.
Yes.
And I think the circular
Marisa, sorry,
yes.
I'm just going to have to. We've actually run out of time, and
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
Thank you. So no, don't apologize. It was great to have that perspective, and thank you, Andrea. And it's a great it will be a great segue into our next session, which is on the 19th of January, which is focused on, as Erin has mentioned, and Molly, on focus on how supporting businesses, how local policies and local government, and that important intersection. And we know, and I think it would be great to have the example of VNF there with all the work that you're doing with the textile companies there. So we'll more to come on that, but I think that's very important. And Molly, I just want to say, how is the best way now with the Miro board that we maybe take a couple of minutes, and I don't know how you want to wrap up that activity. Maybe.
I see that there's still so much activity going on in there. Okay. I wonder if the link will just remain open so people can continue, they can come back to it if they'd like. We'll build out this activity for the next session. And I think that probably what we'll do is we'll just find a couple of cool things we see in it and share out at the beginning of the next session to just loop back to this. Great. So I think we can mostly just wrap up here and say thank you to everyone, and whatever else IURC wants to say to close. I know from our part, we're really grateful for this time with so many amazing cities.
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, Manuel had to go, but I think it was a great introduction, starting at the policy level from Manuel, and then hearing from Molly and Erin. And Erin, I loved your presentation. I think I learned a lot from it. So thank you for that. I think it was a great scene setting, and also kind of putting into context where Fort Collins is in their journey and more broadly. So thank you for that. It's really generous of you and Metabolic to provide your time and inputs. And I can just say that I'm really happy with this session. We know that these webinars, they take time and from you all, and we are now working more in person than online. And our goal was to be interactive and participatory, and really starting to kind of roll up our sleeves. And that's why we have the Miro board as well, that we want to have your input, and also for future sessions that we have together. So we have the 19th of January that's focused, as I said, on the business side, and then the 23rd of February, if I have it right. Yes. And that, I think the idea is like how we can support those those of you who are part of this working group in implementing your own circular economy framework. So we're going to look at the Miro boards. We're going to look at that and had conversations with you. And please feel free to write to us and tell us how will be the most useful. So that really kind of a working group session. So it's kind of wrapped up masterclass, and then moving more towards the working group. So this is, what we've wanted to create here, and I think that we have is a safe space for you all to, reflect and learn and share with peers and cohort this wonderful people who are part, and cities that are part of the IURC program. So I just want to say thank you all for joining, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. This is a little experimental, including the Miro board. Thank you, Molly and Holly and Erin, for working on that. We know that it's more interesting being active in these sessions rather than being kind of just passive listeners. So that's our intention with all of and the other themes as well, for all the IURC North America webinars that we're doing over the next year. So I think that's all I have to say. It was great seeing old friends or friends who I've known before, and new friends and people joining us. And we look forward to your feedback, and have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. So thank you.